So here we go. The name of the parsha, Bishalach, means when he sent, and is found in Exodus chapter 13, verse 17. Soon after allowing the children of Israel to depart from Egypt, Pharaoh chases after them to force their return. And the Israelites find themselves trapped between Pharaoh's armies and the sea. God tells Moses to raise his staff over the water. The sea splits to allow the Israelites to pass through, and then closes over the pursuing Egyptians. Moses and the children of Israel sing a song of praise and gratitude to God. That, I would say, is the first half of the parsha, maybe more. In the desert, the people suffer thirst and hunger and repeatedly complain to Moses and Aaron. God miraculously sweetens the bitter waters of Marah, and later has Moses bring forth water from a rock by striking it with his staff. He causes manna to rain down from the heavens before dawn each morning, and quails to appear in the Israelite camp each evening. The children of Israel are instructed to gather a double portion of manna on Friday, as none will descend on Shabbat, the divinely decreed day of rest. Some disobey and go to gather manna on the seventh day, but find nothing. Aaron preserves a small quantity of manna in a jar as a testimony for future generations. In Rephidim, the people are attacked by the Amalekites, the nation of Amalek, who are defeated by Moses' prayers and an army raised by Joshua. So that's the story in short. You have the Exodus, you have this beginning of the description of the Exodus, the splitting of the sea, the song of the sea, subsequent stories with water, they need food, they need meat, and finally, the story of Amalek. So there's a lot to talk about and a lot to think about. As always, the difficult question is where to begin. So one of the things you want to think about, let's open the parsha again. We'll start reading the verses inside, and hopefully we can get some insight here. Okay, so what do we have here? We have this. So beginning of the parsha. Parsha begins verse 17. Okay, so what do we have here? We have, it came to pass when Pharaoh let the people go. Not an excellent translation. Bishalach, when Pharaoh sent them, that God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, for it was near, because God said, lest the people reconsider when they see the war and return to Egypt. So God led the people through by way of the desert to the Red Sea, and the children of Israel were armed when they went up out of Egypt. So this is just a little bit of navigation. What happens is, the easiest way to go from Egypt to Israel is to walk along the coast and go sort of north. I mean, the coast is moving east, but it's northeast, so you're going upward. Let's look at a quick map of Israel. Hopefully we can find a quick map here. Map of Israel, biblical map of Israel and Egypt. Okay, what are we going to come up with? Okay, so who do we like? Any of these guys should be okay. Okay, so what's the quickest way? Let's open this up, visit. Okay, so what's the quickest way to get from Egypt to Israel? You basically go along the coast and you end up Gaza, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and it's actually, that's where people travel. People travel along the coast because the middle is desert. Nobody wants to travel through the desert. The problem is if you go through this way, you're going to meet the Philistines. Philistines are also living at the coast. So the problem is if it's too easy, if the route is too short, the Jewish people will hit the Philistines, and they are going to get discouraged because the Philistines may attack or not give them passage. So what are the people going to do? Do the easiest thing, which will go right back to Egypt. So what does God do? Instead of going to up the coast, they're heading downward. They're heading toward the desert. And the question is, why the detour? And they end up making a very large detour over 40 years. This is not exactly, this map is not perfect, but okay. The bottom line is they take a long detour. So why the detour? Why are they going the opposite direction? They're literally going down and farther away from the promised land. Ultimately, they go to Sinai, which is somewhere down here, if they're headed toward Israel. The answer is because the easy path to Israel is also the easy path back. In other words, to put it another way, if the Jewish people were really free and free of the influence of Egypt, then they can go straight to Israel. The problem is they're not truly fully free. And that's why the opening statement of the Parsha is, Vahi b'shalach paro et ha'am, when Pharaoh sent the people, okay? Here they translate, Pharaoh let the people go. It sounds like Pharaoh is more passive and people are actually leaving. But here's b'shalach paro, Pharaoh sends them away. So we spoke about this in the past, even on Tuesdays, that if you're going because Pharaoh sent you, you're not truly free. So what's going to happen when you have an obstacle? When you have an obstacle, you're going to fall back and go back to the old habits, which is Egypt. So what do you have to do? You have to go through the desert. And here, when you look at the journey through the desert now, the journey through the desert is not just we have to get to Israel, so we have to go through the journey. The journey through the desert is the process by which the Jewish people are going to grow and develop to the point where they are experiencing freedom internally, and therefore the obstacle is not going to make them run away. So that may take time. That may take 40 years. It's supposed to take a few weeks. Eventually, it takes 40 years. But the way we look at those 40 years is not that this is a delay to get into Israel. It's a necessary step. You're going to have to develop internally to be able to overcome the obstacles that are going to stand in your way of the conquest of the land of Israel. So that's the deep meaning of the word, of the verse, that God has taken the detour. The detour is because you need the time to develop. And maybe that's the theme of the whole parsha. The whole theme of the whole parsha, maybe one of the recurring themes, is that freedom is a process. And it's not like God takes us out of Egypt and now all our problems are solved. God takes us out of Egypt means now we can begin achieving spiritual freedom. But it's going to take time. And it's going to take time, and it's going to be a process. And maybe that's one of the important points of the parsha, especially if you want to apply it to our own spiritual service. So that's maybe something general. Continuing on that same theme, I'm going to say the verses again. So there's verse 19. Okay, let's talk about verse 19 for a minute. What happens when they leave Egypt? The first thing we know, verse 19, sounds like a technicality, but maybe an important technicality, but it sounds like a technicality, but maybe it's more than just a technicality. So let's look at verse 19. Verse 19 states, Moses took Joseph's bones with him, for he, Joseph, had adjured the sons of Israel, saying, God will surely remember you, and you shall bring up my bones from here with you. In other words, at the end, if you remember the end of the book of Genesis, the Torah talks about how Jacob passes away, and then eventually how Joseph passes away. And the final verses of the book of Genesis is that Joseph tells his brothers, God is going to remember you, bring you out of Egypt, and when he does, take my bones, bring my bones with you back to Israel. And so here we're saying, look, the Jewish people kept the promise. What's the promise? They actually passed it on to their descendants, because the people, Joseph's brothers, had also died long before, 130 years before, maybe more. So a few hundred, many decades earlier. So the point here is that the Jewish people, the brothers of Joseph, made their children promise and made their grandchildren promise that when they leave Egypt, they're going to take Joseph back. So it seems like a technicality. Yeah, if you want to leave, Moshe is going to carry the bones of Joseph to fulfill Joseph's promise. But if you think about it, the commentary said there's a lot more symbolism here. What is the symbolism of Moshe taking Joseph back out of Egypt? There's different interpretations. I want to give one or two. So one interpretation is, in a way, what is the cause of what was the cause of the entire slavery in Egypt. So there's a question of what is the purpose of the slavery and why did God want the slavery in Egypt? It's fascinating that a story so important to the 5 books of Moses and to the Jewish history, the Torah doesn't tell us explicitly what would be the purpose of the slavery. In fact, when it's first introduced to Abraham, when God tells Abraham at the Brit Ben Abtarim, the covenant between the parts, and he says that your descendants are going to be slaves for 400 years, and then they're going to leave with great wealth and be brought back to Israel, the first time this concept is introduced, the reason for this story is not told. We don't know why. Now, there's in other places in Deuteronomy where it's alluded to, but without getting into all the various reasons. In other words, the big picture of why the slavery is necessary. Is it just a punishment? Is it a preparation? Without putting that aside for right now, let's just talk practically. How does the slavery in Egypt come about? It comes about, right? You want to start telling the story. I always say, you want to start telling the story. Where do you start telling the story? Right? I got into an altercation with my friend. How far do you want to go back? Where does the story begin? Maybe the story begins 5 minutes before the altercation. Maybe the story begins with my grandmother. Maybe the story begins when we first came to this country. Maybe it goes back thousands of years, right? Where are you going to start the story? So where does the story of the slavery in Egypt start? So one way to think about it, it starts at the point of the brothers' sale of Joseph to Egypt. So it's the hatred between the brothers and Joseph. That leads ultimately to the jealousy, ultimately to the sale of Joseph. And Joseph rises to power, so and there's a famine, so the brothers come and move to Egypt, migrate to Egypt. But essentially what happens is, what is the cause? Forget about the reason, but I'm asking the cause. What is the cause for the slavery? It's the sale of Joseph, the rift in the family between Jacob's children, where the brothers sell Joseph. Okay, so what's the healing? What's the healing? The healing is if you're going to bring Joseph back. If you're going to bring Joseph back in the family, if the brothers are going to care about Joseph. So in some ways, Moshe taking Joseph back up is very important because that represents the healing of the brothers. And there's something that I want to say. I said it in the past, but to me, it's very powerful. If you look at the entire Bible, so the Bible, as you know, has 5 books. There's 5 books of Moses, but then you have subsequent books. You have the books of the prophets and the writings. And the books of the prophets and the writings are basically a story of the history of the Jewish people unfolding in Israel. And it's a story, it has ups and downs. That's our people. So that's the story of our people. So it's got ups and downs. And there's a very interesting commentary by the sages. And the commentaries say, really, in a perfect world, you wouldn't need the entire Bible. In a perfect world, all you would need is the 5 books of Moses and the book of Joshua. Why? Because what's the Jewish story? In a perfect world, story of our ancestors. The 5 books of Moses ends when the Jewish people are about to enter the land of Israel. And what is the book of Joshua? The book of Joshua is the actual entrance to the land of Israel and the conquest of the land. So where do you say we lived happily ever after? Live happily ever after is at the end of the book of Joshua. Why do I need the subsequent books, the books of Judges and the books of Kings? Judges, Samuel, Kings, etc., the prophets. Why? Why do I need the other books? Because things were not going the way they should be. Because there were trouble, because there were problems. So God has to dispatch prophets to solve the problems. And the books of the Kings, because there's issues that arise. So the story continues. But in the perfect world, happily ever after is the end of the book of Joshua. What is at the end of the book of Joshua? What's the last verse of the end of the book of Joshua? The last book of the book of Joshua, which is supposed to be the end of the Bible, is that the bones of Joseph, whom the Jewish people brought out of Egypt, they buried in Shechem. That's the final verse, or the second to final verse, I don't remember. But Rashi comments, and it's the final commentary of Rashi on the book of Joshua. Rashi says, the bones of Joseph, who the Jewish people took out of Egypt, they brought back to Shechem, and he was buried in Shechem. Today it's called the Arab name, the English name is Nablus, so you can go there. It's not so safe. Well, sometimes you can go there. Says Rashi, he was taken from Shechem, and now he's returned from Shechem. Where was the kidnapping of Joseph? The kidnapping of Joseph happens from the city of Shechem. He went to Shechem. That's where his brothers kidnapped him and sold him. Hundreds of years later, the Bible ends. You know where Jewish history ends? You know where, not only when we come back to Israel and we settle the land, but when we heal the rift within the Jewish family. And what and with that, and the symbol of that is that Joseph comes home full circle. If that's the case, now you know why in this week's Parsha, the first thing we say at the Exodus is Moshe takes Joseph's bones, because the sale of Joseph is the what led to the slavery. The healing of a slavery, the freedom cannot come unless you heal that rift in the family. So that is one way of explaining why that's so important to mention. Could have said it elsewhere. Mention, the Jewish people left Egypt. Don't forget they took Joseph's bones. But another way, more of a philosophical way to look at the story, is that the Jewish people came to Egypt through Joseph, right? We know that because, again, Joseph was sold and then he rose to power and then there was a famine, so he brings his family down to Egypt. So Joseph is the cause of the Jewish people's descent into Egypt, ultimately slavery in Egypt. Moshe is the cause of the Jewish people's ascent. They're going out of Egypt. When you look at the surface, these stories are opposite. Moshe and Joseph are actually opposite because the orientation of their stories is the opposite. The whole purpose of Joseph advances the plot by bringing the people to Egypt. Moshe advances the plot by taking the people out of Egypt. So what are you going to say? These two things are opposite. The Torah right away at the Exodus says Moshe takes Joseph's bones with him, right? That's the verse that we showed. Here it is, verse 19. As soon as we said, we leave Egypt, Moses took Joseph's bones with him. What is the Torah telling us? These are not two opposite stories. There's not a story that I had a problem, and then 200 years later I have a solution. Joseph takes us to Egypt, and Moshe takes us out. It's one story. One story in the sense that the descent is for the purpose of ascent. That's a very Kabbalistic and Hasidic concept. Whenever there's a descent, it's for the ascent that's going to follow. So we have a challenge, and then you grow from the challenge. And I say, I'm so happy that I grew from the challenge, but I wish I didn't have the challenge to begin with. That is a superficial way of looking at it. You would not be able to grow without that challenge. So in other words, Joseph and Moshe, if you want to look at the story or history or our story or life from the divine perspective, Moshe and Joseph going into Egypt and going out of Egypt is not two separate stories. It's the same story. It's the same circle. It's the same event. There's two sides of the same coin. You can't have the Exodus and the freedom that comes about without first going through the challenge. And that is a very important skill in our life, because in our life we each have a challenge, and we could look at the challenge as an obstacle, or you can look, as the Hasidim always say, a challenge is a springboard. And in a springboard, you're going to go down before you can go up. So what the Torah is signaling to us is that Joseph and Moshe is part of the same story. And this leads us to a greater theme that we can really talk about in the last few portions, going back from the beginning of this book of the Exodus. So it's Shmos Va'era by B'Shalach, already 4 portions. And if you talk about the concept, and we talked about this here in the past, so forgive me if you heard it before, the concept of storytelling, or even more of singing, because this week's parsha is all about the song of the crossing of the sea. So if you look about it, there's a very beautiful Kabbalistic commentary that says as follows. It says that the word Passover, the word Pesach, we know why we read it last week, why the holiday is called Passover, because God passes over the Jewish homes when he struck the firstborn Egyptians, and the Jewish firstborns were spared. So Pesach is to leap over. But the Kabbalists write that the word Pesach comes from 2 words, Pesach, the speaking mouth. And they say freedom is connected with your ability to talk. And specifically, the ability to say stories. Because last week's parsha, it says, God says, I'm going to take you out of Egypt, Leman tisaper, so you will tell the story to your descendants. So the Kabbalists say, if you think about it, speech and storytelling is freedom. And in fact, if you look at the last 4 portions, as I mentioned, when the Jewish people, the more they go into the slavery and the more harsh the slavery becomes, the less they talk. In fact, at the most bitter point of slavery, what does it say? it says the Jewish people screamed to God. Vayitza'aku. Okay, so screams to God. Screaming to God sounds like a very deep connection that's coming from a very deep place. Yes, but the Kabbalists say you're screaming, but there's no articulation. There's no words, and more specifically, there's no story, and there's certainly no song. And one way just to think about this, the way in connection which we just spoke about Joseph and Moshe, what's the difference? What's a story? What's a plot? What's a story? And the story is that you have various events, and if you could see meaning between these events, you have a story, you have a plot, as opposed to different things. If I say, today I woke up and ate breakfast, and then I got stuck in traffic, then I got a ticket, then I missed the train. Okay, these are individual events. Individual events are not stories. Story, and if you could talk about a story and say a story, is the ability to be able to string together various events that make it one cohesive existence and one cohesive experience. So I can go through life and think about the challenges, and each challenge is its own problem. But if it's its own problem, then I can't speak about it, because when I speak about it, it means I'm taking control, I am framing, I'm talking about it, I'm explaining the meaning that it has to me. So if I can't speak, I'm passive. If I could speak and find the meaning and see how it's not this challenge is not in isolation, but it's part of my greater mission, and it's helping me get to where I need to be, then I'm storytelling. And if I'm storytelling, I'm free. And if we have time, we can also talk about how even telling a story is not enough. If you could sing, you're free. So you're not really free until you could sing. But that's this week's parsha, but we're not there yet because we're not at the Song of the Sea yet. We're still just trying to get out of Egypt. So the first thing we're saying, we get out of Egypt. The first step of going out of Egypt is realizing that the problem and the solution are not two separate stories, it's one story. Every challenge in my life, or every difficulty, or every distraction, or every chore. Look at the chore. I have to go to Whole Foods, wait online and find parking and pick up a tomato. You don't want to live life that way. But if you could string the story together and say, wow, this is part of the event that I'm planning for Shabbat, and I'm going to invite in a guest, and we're going to celebrate, and we're going to connect, then all of a sudden you liberated all those specific events and you made it one story, and you brought meaning to all the difficulties that preceded that event. Okay, go ahead, Vicky, please.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi. I think you partially answered my question before I even asked it, as usual, because my question was about, is there any commentary or research done about the importance of how you tell the story? So you said the singing is important because it's poetry. Is humor important? Is the positive spin important? Because in Torah we do find some stories that they were retold in different ways and the different angle.
So I would say that the quintessential Jewish answer is it depends. There's different types of stories. There are happy stories, there are sad stories. But the most important thing is there's a story. Story means there's meaning. Story means the events aren't random. That's the most important thing. And if you think about this, when challenges are only challenges when they have no meaning. But when you see how this difficulty is actually leading me somewhere, there's meaning to this, then it's enjoyable, right? If you go to the gym and they make you work hard, the pain I think we may have talked about this in the last week or two, because I remember talking about this, but difficulty is not what makes something painful. It's the difficulty plus the meaning. And if there's no meaning, then the equation is difficulty and meaning equals how much pain there is, right? The more difficulty, but if there's more meaning, then that minimizes the pain. Pain is when I don't sense any meaning for this. That's why it's very different. Yeah, okay.
Beautiful.
Point is, there's some sad stories, but sad stories are the comfort is in the story.
Right, but here in the Torah, you usually, in the written Torah at least, you don't have the meaning spelled out. So this is something that we have to derive.
Yeah, but the premise of the Torah is, if you're telling a story means there's meaning. Like I said, I don't know what the meaning is, but I see right away that we're connecting Moshe and Joseph. I'm saying it's one story. What that story is, there could be multiple meanings. And maybe different people have different ways of reading the story. And maybe there are multiple meanings. And maybe every person reads the story and finds their own meaning. But the most important thing to understand is there is meaning in collective history and in personal history. And this was a very big leap from the Torah over the pagan society. Pagan society says there's no meaning, it's all cyclical. Things happen, and there's random. Today, it's not pagan, but today, if people in atheism, the problem, could my life have meaning if the universe has no meaning? It's a very interesting something to think about. The opposite of religion is that if there's no God, there's no meaning. If there's no meaning, then there's no story. There's no story to be told, right? So the idea, the search for meaning means it's a search for a story. And if it's random, there's no story. And if a Torah chooses to write a book, writing a book means that there's a story. And the story means there's meaning.
But the meaning is up to us, up to future generations
to discover. And there could be multiple layers of the meaning, and everybody has a personal interpretation of the meaning. So I'm saying that's why I don't know that Torah is going to say it, because I don't know that is only one way of thinking about this. But what all these things have in common is that there's a story to be told. What's the meaning of the story? What's the interpretation of the story is up for debate, and maybe there's no one interpretation. But what is clear, what everybody must accept, in other words, the premise of the book is, if I'm writing a book, and the Torah is a book, if I'm writing a book and I'm telling you a story, the premise is there's a story here, right? If you buy a film and you go to a movie and you have just random events that don't connect, you're going to want your money back. It's not a story, right? The premise of paying the few dollars and buying a ticket to a movie is that someone's going to tell you a story. There's going to be meaning in these events. It's not just this guy had lunch and this guy had breakfast and they crashed. There has to be some meaning here.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Dr. Tamron, please.
Rabbi, you said that singing is an ultimate expression of freedom, correct?
Yes.
And why are women not encouraged to sing?
Women are encouraged to sing. It's that in certain settings in Orthodox Judaism, the men are not supposed to listen to the women sing, but the women are supposed to sing.
And why
the reason for that? One of the reasons for that is in other words, it's the point of singing is a deep expression of self, and you're talking about modesty. In other words, at the end of so this proves the point. It doesn't negate the point. It proves the point that the most powerful thing you can do, the exposing of self, that the deepest exposing of self happens through song, happens through music. So then the question is, how do you do it in a modest way? But it's not that the woman can't sing, it's the men can't listen. That's what I keep telling my daughters. They say, "You sure?" I say, "I'm sure."
So the idea
you can listen to your daughters sing. There's no problem. My daughters have very nice voices. I listen to my daughters sing, but they say we're not supposed to sing. I say, no, you're supposed to sing. The guy can't listen. It's his problem. It's not your problem.
I see. And he's not supposed to listen because presumably, what are you revealing? What is Vicky revealing to me?
Right. Right. And again, it's not always, there are ways to do it, again, without getting into the laws. But the point here is that it's a very deep expression. I could buy your book, but listening to you sing is going to reveal something much more deeper within yourself. And we could talk about the singing and what it means and why singing is so powerful. Hopefully we'll have a few minutes to do that today, because that's the central theme of the parsha. The highlight of the parsha is the song. And why song? What's wrong with prose? You want to say a story, say a story. What's the music? What is singing? And it's not just, there was music, because we read about Miriam singing with the tambourines. So there was music, but when we say song, we even mean the poetry. So you're writing not prose, but writing with a certain rhythm. So it's poetry. So even that is much deeper than just prose. So what's the power of music? What's the power of song? What's the power of poetry?
It's a great subject. I spend all day listening to music. So believe
great.
And yes. Vicky is a musician. So basically, the idea that music is the deepest expression of who we are is very appealing to both.
And it's liberating. When I'm in a bad mood, I know what I have a playlist. I know what I have to listen to well and when. And I know that before I'm in this situation.
So what do you listen to when you're in a bad mood?
I don't listen to a wide variety of music. I listen to Hasidic music, but within that genre, I know who I have to listen to, and I know when I have to listen to him, and I know which song.
So do you listen to sad music when you're sad, or upbeat?
Not necessarily. I personally have, I personally need, the blend of sadness and hope works for me. So it's not just joy. It can't just be, it has to be a certain.
Because I did a study years ago with a resident in psychiatry who was also training in music. And she found that when you play upbeat music to depressed people, it really pisses them off. They don't like it at all.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's fascinating. It's almost like yeah, fascinating. Yeah, so let's see where we're going to go with this. Let's talk about music for a minute, and I really want to talk about the big picture and then tie that into music. So that's what we want to get to.
But speaking of poetry, not only music, poetry can get to the essence of the meaning. So in search of meaning, poetry can help sometimes more than prose.
Yeah, so within poetry, there's two elements, the way I see it as a layperson. There is the idea that the poet is conveying, and there's the music with which it is being conveyed. Right? So if you can explain to me the poem, you can say, I think right now I'm going to analyze this leaf. Okay? So now I hear you have an idea. But when you say it poetically, it's not just tickling my mind, it's also tickling something deeper than mind. The music is tickling something deeper. That's what we're trying to say. Okay, so let's put it in right here. Let's put it right here. There's a very interesting difference between music and almost anything else you'll do. And that is that with everything else, the more you do it, the less you enjoy it. Okay, so if you have to eat a piece of cake, the first bite is the most enjoyable. The second bite, it's the same amount of calories, but it's less pleasure. Okay. Right? They say, what do they say? They say the banquet is in the first bite. You know, so I always say I eat a piece of chocolate, I like it. Then I eat a second piece. Why do I eat a second piece? Because I want to recreate the feeling that I had when I ate the first piece. The problem is the second piece never tastes as good as the first piece. So what do? Then I take the third piece because I think maybe if the second one didn't do it, maybe the third one will do it. So I'm keep getting the same amount of calories, and but the pleasure keeps going down. Even with ideas, even with a book, I bought a great book. You read it once, it's enjoyable. Read it the second time, it's not as enjoyable. You hear a new idea. First time you hear it, it's exciting. But if I came every class on Tuesday and said the same thing, after a while, you're going to be saying, okay, I'm going to find a different Zoom to join because this is sort of getting boring, even if it's an amazing idea. But the novelty is where the joy lasts, where the pleasure lays. So pleasure and novelty are very much connected. Almost the only time where you see that something physical, something in the physical world actually defies that pattern is music. Very often, the music that you love is not the music that you hear for the first time. In fact, the first time you hear it, you don't necessarily like it. There's only two songs that I can think of in the past 30 years, 35 years since I remember songs, that I fell in love with them the first time I heard them. And one of them happened 2 weeks ago, and I can't stop listening to it. My wife is very upset at me. She tells me our 20 years of marriage, this is our biggest dispute about this song. The point is, I can't stop listening to it. But usually, you don't fall in love with a song the first time. When you hear it, many times, the longer you hear it, the more pleasure it gives you. And if you think about which songs do you like the songs that you heard 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And it's the opposite pattern where the novelty is not in the pleasure is not in the novelty, the pleasure is in the repetition, which is a very strange phenomenon because almost nothing in this world works that way. Almost always you need novelty. I can't go on the same vacation I went on. I can't buy the same yacht I went on. I can't, I always have to be changing because pleasure is related to novelty. Music is the only thing where pleasure is sort of repetition brings you pleasure. So what does that tell you? It tells you that somehow or another, I don't know the science of this, but somehow or another, the music is touching a place within your soul that is much deeper than the conscious mind. Because the conscious mind is always looking for pleasure that is new. But if you're getting very primal and you're going very deep place in your subconscious mind, that's where you're touching the things that are where joy is repetition. And if you think about the greatest pleasures of life, they're not new, but you have to get into that space. Sort of go beyond the mind that's trying to analyze. Just going outside in the sun and breathing oxygen is the most pleasurable thing you could do. If you put aside your analyzing mind that says, okay, what am I doing today? How are we spending the time? Are we enjoying the vacation, right? So in other words, when you get deeper within yourself, then there's no such thing of getting bored. There's no such thing as getting burnt out because you're touching the place of life, and life itself is just the soul itself is just a reservoir of passion and excitement and joy. When you start thinking about the analyzing mind, so that's limitation. Limitation is, okay, you have to now start thinking about novelty. So it's ironic that the deeper you go within self, the less novel things have to be. And music is sort of a fast track to get to that subconscious place within the soul. How that works, I don't know, but I'm just talking from the fact. The fact is, like I said, that you sing the same song every day and you get excited. Now, it's a very interesting thing. Give me just 1 second, doctor, but I just want to point out, say 2 more points. 1 point to make a bigger point. The smaller point is when you talk about religious life, a lot of it is prayer. And the problem with prayer, and a lot of people have a very difficult problem with prayer, the problem with prayer is that it's so repetitious. I'm saying the same prayers every day. And the question is, what's the meaning? I could literally, and I'm not saying I do this, but I could literally read an article in the newspaper and say the whole prayer by heart subconsciously and say every word, but because I've been saying it for 30 years, the same prayers 3 times a day. So what's the point? So so one answer is that if you're thinking of prayer as prose, you missed the boat. It's pointless. Why are you saying the same thing every day? But if you think of prayer as music, that's where the meaning is. In fact, one of the sections of prayer we call Psukei Dezimra, songs of praise. It has to be a song. It has to be a song because otherwise there's no point. There's no point of saying the same thing. But if it's a song, you're going to a deep place within self, then it doesn't run out. Because then you're touching life itself, and life itself is always enjoyable. So, okay, I'll take doctor's question, and then we'll say the big picture. Let me get to the big idea. Go ahead, doctor, please.
I'm sure this is true of everybody in your call. You never cease to amaze me with the breadth of what you say and the range that goes so far beyond simply the words of Torah. So what you just said about music, I've been studying recently, and Vicky can relate this. I've been studying recently. I'm a jazz saxophone player, and I've been studying improvisation. And he's been saying, repeat the phrase a number of times. Don't keep trying to play something new like you think you're, some bebop player, because that's boring. Basically, listening to bebop is, listening to some guy just go all over a saxophone. The great solos like Stan Getz often involve repetition, including the melody, including repetition of small pieces and silence in between. And you've just confirmed exactly what I've learned about improvisational jazz.
Yeah, and also when you repeat, even the same musician repeats the same composition, he doesn't repeat it the same way 2 times. You can't. It's a live music. And also when you listen to music, you find in every single repetition, you find something new when you listen at a different time, at a different.
That's true, because like you said about poetry, everything has 2 elements. The poetry has the idea and it has the music. And music itself has 2 elements, has the idea and has the music. And when it comes to the idea, I want to hear something new every time. When it comes to the music, I don't want to hear something new every time. I don't need to hear something new every time. I'm going deeper than that. I'm going deeper than analysis. So I once told this to somebody, he says, really? He says, well, I go back to the same books every year, I read the same books. I said, yeah, because you're looking for the music of the book. You're not looking for the story. If it's just a story, you have to hear something new. But if it's music, if it's something poetic about this for you, then it's music for you. So that's the idea here. Okay, so let's think about this for a second, and let's talk about what is freedom. And I could show it to you in so many areas of the parsha. You know what? So let me put one more piece in the puzzle, and then we'll come back and make the full picture with the music and with everything. I'm going to show one more piece of the puzzle, maybe 2 more pieces of the puzzle, then we tie everything together. Okay, one of the strangest parts of the parsha is, so the Jewish people are going south instead of going to Israel. They come to the sea. Pharaoh chases them, right? Verse 5. They have some drama here. Why not? Someone could make a movie about this. It'd be wonderful. Oh, I think they did, but okay. It was reported to Pharaoh that the people had fled, and Pharaoh and his servants had a change of heart toward the people. And they said, what is this that we have done? That we have released Israel from serving us. So he, Pharaoh, harnessed his chariot and took his people with him. He took 600 select tanks. No, there were no tanks then. He took 600 select chariots and all the chariots of Egypt with officers over them all. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and he chased after the children of Israel, and the children of Israel were marching out triumphantly. Okay, what happens to the Jewish people? Look, verse 10. Okay. 10, Pharaoh drew near, and the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were advancing after them. They were frightened. And what do the Jews do when they're frightened? And the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. What does the Lord say? It's so beautiful, okay? Look at verse 15. Verse 15 is a very surprising verse. And the Lord said to Moses, why do you cry out to me? Speak to the children of Israel and let them travel. Basically, now is not a time for prayer. Even in verse 14, the Lord will fight for you, but you shall remain silent. Verse 15, the Lord said to Moses, why do you cry out to me? Speak to the children of Israel and let them travel, which is seemingly very surprising. Because what do Jews do when there's a problem? Always, we pray. We pray when there's no problems. When there's a problem, we certainly pray. We certainly scream to Hashem. Here, God says, why are you praying to me? Just travel. What happens? Okay, so they have to travel. They can't pray. So big question is, why not pray? Now there's a very interesting story. The interesting story is the Medrash says the story, and I'll tell you in a minute where the Medrash gets it from. But there's an interesting Medrash. The Medrash says that the sea didn't split until some people actually got not only their toes wet, but they actually went into the sea and walked into the sea and started crossing, because God says travel, so they travel, but it didn't slip until the water sort of reaches their neck. When the water reaches the neck, that's when it splits. That's what the Medrash says. If you want to see where the Medrash gets it from, it's a nuance, but it's interesting. Some places it says, verse 22. Then the children of Israel came into the midst of the sea on dry land. They came into the midst of the sea by dry land. That's the verse. B'toch hayam bayabasha, into the midst of the sea on dry land. What does it say at the end? At the end later it says, Ubnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, went on dry land in the midst of the sea. So what was it? Was it in the midst of the sea on dry land, or was it on dry land in the midst of the sea? Same thing, it's just you're changing the order of the verse. So the commentaries say, no, it's very important. The beginning refers to the people who went in when it was still sea. They went into before the water split. So that's verse 22. Children of Israel, some of them came into the midst of the sea, and then it became dry land. And the end, 29, the children of Israel went on dry land in the midst of the sea. They came in, it was already dry land. Okay, what's the big idea here? What's the problem with praying? Why do you have to go ahead and just travel and not pray? What's the problem with praying in this context? So the big idea here is that to become spiritually free, you cannot just always only operate based on calculation. You have to be able to say, I don't know how my problem is going to solve itself, but I have to push forward. Because if you do not move until you have a full plan of how you're going to get to your destination, you are never going to start the journey. So the idea is you do something. And when you do something, you get up, you do your part. When you do something, things are going to fall into place. Now that doing something is a great act of faith, because I don't see how me stepping my foot into the water is going to cause the water to split. I don't see how taking this action is going to solve my underlying problems, right? I have serious problems. Say, don't worry, you just do one thing. Try to do something to help yourself. I don't see how this is going to help me. Logically, I don't see how it's going to help me. What is the message of the story? Logic is going to keep you trapped. What you need is faith. And what is faith? Faith is moving ahead, even though I don't see how my problems are going to solve itself. And the idea is that you can only have freedom when you're willing to take that step in the face of uncertainty and move forward and move in a positive direction and take a positive action before you realize how this positive action is going to open up new doors for you. Right now, there are no doors open. You do your part. Things are going to open up. That's when you're free. If you sit and you wait until you know exactly the plan, it's not going to work. There's this guy in Israel who I listen to. He's a general. And he's a fascinating person because he grew up in a religious home, and I think now he's not that religious, but he's very knowledgeable of the Torah and of the Kabbalah and of Arab culture and Muslim culture. Fascinating guy to listen to. And he talks about, I always listen to him because you get some politics and spiritual ideas. He talks about how the East goes to war and how the West goes to war. And he says, in the West, you go to war is like building a bridge. You're not going to start before you know your destination. It's not just building. It's not just going to war, anything. But you're not going to start before you know where you want to end. He says the East. He says about the former Soviet Union and Russia, but he says also in the East in general, and he says that's the real way to do war. In other words, the smarter way to do it is you don't have to know the destination because you cannot know what opportunities are going to open themselves up. What you do is you move the board, right? You shake up the board, you do something, you take an action. And when you take an action, all of a sudden, opportunities may open up. Someone may make a mistake. You wait till the opportunity opens. So the point is, and he talks about this, how in Judaism, there's something called in the Kabbalah, Teruta Latato, awakening from below. You do your part. And if you do your part, ultimately, God is going to help. But if you say, I'm not taking a step before I know how this step is going to get me to my ultimate plan, then you're not going to be able to ultimately, you're going to be imprisoned in your current situation because not always could you know how the ultimate plan is going to work itself out. So in other words, what are we talking about? We're talking about you leave Egypt. To be free, you need faith. And faith would mean step into the sea before you know how it's going to split. Faith would mean go beyond the logic, do something positive, even if you don't know how this process is ultimately going to work out. Do that action and things are going to work out. Part of that is singing, because singing is suspending the analytical mind and getting to the subconscious mind, right? I'm not happy. Well, I'm not happy because all the things my mind is telling me I'm not where I need to be, et cetera, et cetera. Then I turn my mind off. I put in the music, and what happens? Everything is fine. What happened? Everything is fine. You solve the problems? No. But I'm taking an act of faith. I'm going beyond the analytical mind, and I'm saying I'm tapping into something deeper. I'm tapping into my soul. I can't explain why I should be happy right now. I cannot explain how the things are going to resolve themselves. But things do resolve themselves, and they resolve themselves when you take the action. And that is the big idea here. Freedom would be the faith, and the faith leads to song. It's all the same thing. Because if you ask someone logically why you're singing, they're not going to be able to tell you. What are you singing? What are you jumping up and down? What are you making these? What are you getting excited about? It's nothing too exciting. You have to bypass the mind to get to that place of joy. Now, what's fascinating is verse 33, right before they sing the song, right? If you look at chapter 15 is, Az Yashir Moshe, then Moses and the children of Israel sang the song to the Lord. So that's the song. What happens right before the song for the first time, not the first time, but right before the song, it says what? It says, Vayar Yisrael, Israel saw the great hand which the Lord had used upon the Egyptians, and the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in Moses, his servants. Vayaminu is believe, Aminu is faith. They had faith in the Lord. If you have faith in the Lord, you could sing. If you don't have faith, you can't sing. Because if you don't have faith and you're just using the analytical mind, there's no room for music. There's no room to say, I'm going beyond logic. I'm going to go beyond my logical analysis and touch something deeper that's going to bring me joy and that's going to bring me happiness at any moment. Because remember, anytime you tap into it, you're happy. It doesn't matter if you thought about it yesterday, because that's the power of music, where repetition does not take away the pleasure, because you're touching a deep place within yourself, which is the ultimate life and the ultimate pleasure. So if you want to really connect everything in this parasha, these are the themes. And even after this song, even after the story of the splitting of the sea, we have again subsequent stories about people complaining about manna. And the whole idea of the manna is to think about faith. We can talk about that. Even Amalek later on, Amalek is also highlights the story of taking action. So we can go in all different directions, but we can talk about the specific stories, or we can talk about the overarching theme of that parsha. The overarching theme of the parsha is to be free from the analytical mind, which sort of holds you back in many situations. We're not saying analyzing is not good, but if you could solve your problems through analyzation, good. But if you have to go beyond that, if you have to break free of that, you have to touch something deeper. And the way you touch something deeper is you move forward. But I don't see how moving forward is going to solve my problem. My kid says, I have a test tomorrow. I can't study. I say, study for 15 minutes. Can I explain how logically studying for 15 minutes is going to help? I can't cover all the material in 15 minutes. It doesn't matter. Take an action, do something positive. Things are going to work out. That requires faith, and that's the place of music. So that is the pitch for the parsha. And now we have the pitch. Now we can start analyzing and studying the parsha. We have 6 minutes left for that, so we'll see how much we can do, but that's the big idea.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I was just thinking that many years ago, I wrote a paper called Music as the Magic Elixir. And I began by quoting Plato, who said, music gives a soul to the universe, wings to the mind, flight to the imagination, and life to everything. And then Nietzsche, who I have mixed feelings about, he said, without music, life would be a mistake.
Wow. Very powerful. Very powerful. So the question is, I think people feel that innately. The question is, if you go to each one of those figures and you ask them why, right? So maybe they could explain, maybe they can't explain. The Hasidic perspective would be, or the Kabbalistic perspective would be, you're going to a deeper place than the analytical mind. And the analytical mind, at the end of the day, even though it has many blessings, but it also has the power to limit you. Because if you say, I feel stuck, I don't see logically how I'm going to solve the problem. So in other words, the music is the breaking free of the elements of life that are finite, and it's touching the essence and the core, which is infinite. So I think we all agree on, we all agree. I think what the description of song and music is something that people relate to because people sense this. The question is, how does this work and how to think about it? Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Oh, thank you. Just a couple of words to add to our conversation. In Soviet Union, when they took away the religion altogether, people started gravitating towards arts and music more, because that's the one step to spirituality. So that's
right. No,
because
it's very spiritual. Music,
express your spiritualities, express your faith, believe in something greater. There is something greater.
Yeah. It's the parts of self that cannot be explained and analyzed. You know, analyzation has its limitation. And at some point, we know if you overanalyze, you're stuck, you can't take action. So at the end of the day, there's a time to pray and to think, and there's a time to act. And when you get to the problem, when everything is closing in on you, you have to act. And that action, you may not know how it's going to solve. So it's going to require faith. But when you can have faith, then the sea splits. If the sea splits, you could sink.
Rabbi?
Yes.
It may be of interest to you and others here to know that the founder of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, disliked music.
That's great. I love that. I love that. Yes, if you have to analyze everything, then what are you going to do with the things you cannot analyze? Right?
Exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah. I love that. That's great.
Well, music can be unanalyzed. There is a science called musicology.
But again, music only works. There has to be a rhythm. Rhythm has laws. You can't write poetry without doing the laws. There's always a balance between the order and the logic and the music, right? So it's also in life. Even in music, you're not escaping the patterns that make sense. You need the patterns, but you need the patterns that allow for music and allow you to go beyond them. But if you're just like the doctor was describing about just playing random music without any tune, then they're just saying, I'm in the infinite. I'm just shooting all over the place. That's not infinity. Infinity is when you're connecting the infinite with the finite. In other words, this bridge where you're in both worlds at the same time. There are patterns, and the music comes from those patterns. That's the paradox here, right? They talk about this, a game, the good games. I don't know, at some point they thought chess was infinite. I don't remember if they still think chess is infinite or not. I'm not a mathematician, but they were talking about the idea that the beauty of the game is seemingly there's infinite possibilities, but there are very specific rules. So it's like the bridge. In other words, games that can be solved are not interesting. I think checkers, they solved a long time ago, right? So games that can be solved quickly, so it's not a game. You have to have the feeling of infinity within a finite space. And that's what music is. To create music, you need to have limitation. You need to have rules. You need to have patterns. But you're not getting boxed into those patterns. In fact, those patterns are creating something that we call music. So it's not just I'm saying, oh, I don't have to worry about analysis. I'm just going to run and do crazy things. That's not what we're saying. We're saying take a positive step that is that is going to lead you forward, even if you don't know how it's going to solve the problem. So it's not that we're throwing out all analysis. We're just saying that there is analysis. There is also something beyond that. And together, the music happens from bridging the two. We always talk about in Judaism, we're not escaping to the infinite. We're connecting the infinity to the finite. Talked about this on Friday, how in Judaism, every law is very specific. You want to connect to infinity, but you have to do it at a specific time. You have to say the Shema, yeah, but you have to finish before this time, and you have to stop before that time. Every law in Judaism, or every mitzvah, every opportunity to connect to God is very much tied into time and space. Can't just say, oh, I'm going to feel better for me. I'm going to have the Passover Seder 3 weeks early because I'm in a nice place with good weather, and I'm going to feel more connected to Passover. No, it has to be the infinity. The music only happens when you're following certain patterns. You're connecting the infinite to the finite. Okay, a lot more to say. More on this parsha next year, same time, same place, in good health. Thank you all for joining. This was creating good music.
Thank you, Rabbi, for
Maybe
another
harmony. One more thing about music that my other friend said is that when someone talks and someone else talks, that's an interruption. But if one person sings and someone else sings, that's harmony. So you see how the music is spiritual, where my music not only doesn't interrupt you, if you speak and I speak at the same time, it's a problem. But if we have two different sounds, yeah, but that's the beauty, that's the harmony, because we're going beyond the ego and beyond the self. So
thank you very much, Rabbi. I love the lecture today.
Thank you. Thank you for the music. Next time you want to hear it on the instruments. No, I'm kidding. Thank you.
On the saxophone.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful day, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Bye-bye.